I always tell students, like, guys, having a conversation where we're trying to integrate smoothly 30 voices is always going to seem a little bit unwieldy. There are various ways that we could do that. How I introduce it is like Parlay is a way that I like to do it because, you know, I like some of the different features and how it organizes things and gives you data and stuff like that.
Hi there, I'm Annalisa from the team behind Parlay, and I recently sat down with Seth to learn more about how he's been facilitating verbal roundtable discussions with his classes. So if you're interested in trying a verbal discussion, or maybe you're just simply curious about this student-driven approach, then I think you'll find Seth's way interesting. Check it out.
Right now I'm teaching sophomore English and pre-AP English 2. And also a media literacy class. So typically how I've used it has been as either like after we watch something and I want us to like have like a whole class conversation about it. That's been primarily how we've used it for media literacy, but for English, typically after we have read something or as we're like about to read something. So the two books that we have read are 1984 by George Orwell, and then Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. And so anytime we would finish a book, because it's like broken up into 3 books, we would do it as kind of like a way to dialogue about what we were reading and learning. Okay, what are some things that we like concepts that we read about, and like how does this connect to like modern day, and like what are some things that you've made note of? And so, and we use it in a similar way for Just Mercy. We'll read, you know, a handful of chapters and up to the point where like I feel like we kind of need to have like a larger discussion that's more intentional. The first discussion that I had with my English students this semester was just a few weeks ago, and it was right before we started Just Mercy. Because Just Mercy deals with a lot of issues within the criminal justice system, one that's pretty pervasive is the death penalty. And so it's one that just kind of like has lots of room for discussion. I showed them like a short, very objective clip of death penalty pros and cons. It's like it doesn't take a side one way or the other. It says like, here are common arguments for, here are common arguments against, and essentially with the Parlay Genie, and created 5 questions that they then kind of took from there. That kind of got us thinking before we even started talking about Just Mercy to like some of the topics that we would be tackling. And I wanted to kind of get them familiar with the Parlay platform, like in that discussion, so that like when we're talking about Just Mercy stuff, like they've already kind of got somewhat of a base and a foundation for like how the platform works.
And so I guess when you first ran that discussion, was it easy to get students talking, like with the group of students you were working with? Were they really quiet, or were they ready to really jump in and just get into the conversation right away? How did you find that?
It varies. Some of my classes, so I teach 3 classes right now, 3 English classes. 2 of my classes, fantastic, like exceeded my expectations. Like it was super easy. One of my classes, I had to interrupt at one point because it was getting so heated that like I needed to intervene. Basically, I was like, okay, let's pause. Like, okay, let's everybody take a step back. In terms of like starting the conversation, really none of them had a hard time getting started with it. Basically what we did, like we watched the video, and then from there, I said, okay, take some things like from the video, like any other like research you want to use through like procon.org or something else that you want to like kind of organize your talking points. And I gave them about 5 minutes, I think, to like add to their student notes section. And I said, once these 5 minutes are up, like it's go time. Like you guys are, you know, it's on you. You're driving the discussion. I tried to give them a little bit of a heads up on like in the future when I'm actually like doing these for a grade, like here are some of the things I'm going to be looking for. But I mainly just kind of wanted them to get used to the platform and like kind of what my expectations were. I do use the nudge. Some of my students are more responsive to it than others. But like typically I'll give them about like 5 to 10 minutes or so. And what often happens is like the same, I don't know, 6 to 10 or 11 people, like my frequent contributors, those same people kind of like tend to, you know, speak up. I'll just like go through and I just like nudge everybody. I'm like, if you haven't spoken, if it doesn't look like you're gonna speak, I'll just nudge everybody. And that usually gets, I don't know, anywhere between like 5 or maybe 6 people.
You have some poll questions in the roundtables in the universe. Are those kind of just in case you kind of have a lull in conversation, or how do you use that? And what have you found kind of works best with those?
That is the main reason that I use the polls. I mean, sometimes I'm kind of curious about what students' perspectives might be. And so I'll just kind of like, you know, throw something together for that. And like some of them honestly aren't even planned. Some of the ones that you may have seen are like some that I didn't even think of until we were having the discussion. Then I was like, ooh, actually, like I'm going to throw this out there and see, you know, it seems like this is kind of where the conversation's going. Let me just pose this poll, and then they'll, you know, kind of take that and run with it. It can kind of, I guess, serve both purposes. One, like sometimes it's planned and like a just in case the conversation hits a lull. It's kind of a way of like stimulating the conversation a little bit more by getting them to like take a stance and then talk about it. But other times it's very impromptu, like, hey, I feel like this would be good to get students' perspectives on. So let's, throw this out there.
Have you been giving feedback or grading, or are you using any of those features?
I have these 6 components that I'm looking for. And I tell them, like, I want you to like shoot for 5. If you don't get all 6, that's okay. But I use this acronym called BRACES. And I just I'll put up a slide and it says like bringing new insight, respectfully challenging ideas, asking questions, connecting ideas. So like for connecting ideas, I'm like, hey, for this like hypothetical scenario, I'm like, hey, let's say, John, you have a really good idea. I think it's definitely worth taking up, but then Molly says like, that was a great idea, but I don't really want to talk about that. I'm going to share a new idea. And so like, I kind of like run through the scenario with them of like, if all we're ever doing is just new insights, nothing's going to get very far. And so, like try to connect ideas so that we're like getting as much as we can out of the conversation. So that's the C. E is encouraging participation, getting people to speak who haven't yet spoken. And then the S is supporting with evidence. And so like if they can tie back to something like from their personal experience or something that we read or something like research, a source of research of some sort, I'll put that slide up of those things I'm looking for. Part of my role while the discussion is going is I'll just like kind of like click through, like it's just like a 1-point criteria, like either you do or you don't. And a lot of times like a student could contribute something and have like 3 or 4 like in a single contribution if they had a lot to say or had really insightful contributions or something. So I'll use it like that, and it'll be like a 5-point kind of discussion. And if on the off chance that like some students like seem like they wanted to say something but maybe didn't get a chance to, I tell them like as a backup, you can use your like if you have really good student notes, like whatever you contribute to the student notes section, then I can also like use that as part of your like 5-point discussion. But I try to walk the line between this is for a grade and everybody has to contribute and like the anxiety that comes from that, and also like that, hey, if you don't get a chance to speak, don't worry about it because you can just use your notes. And so like kind of try to find that balance. On the data side of things, like I do usually take a few minutes like after the fact to look at like who our top contributors were and like what the average time spent speaking was, and like I'll use that as kind of a catalyst for like reflecting on this, like what can we do differently next time as as we're trying to have like involve as many voices as possible, or like, oh, it looks like we had a lot of new ideas, like maybe we could like have some more connecting ideas, or nobody challenged any ideas. Like that's interesting. Like, are we just all agreeing with each other? Do we not feel like we can like challenge each other's ideas? And so I geek out about that stuff more than I think my students do. And so I try not to like, spend too long with them, but I think it is kind of cool for them to see, and they'll just kind of just a cursory glance over like kind of the main things. I always still like tell students like, guys, having a conversation where we're trying to integrate smoothly 30 voices is always going to seem a little bit unwieldy. There are various ways that we could do that. How I introduce it is like parlay is a way that I like to do it because, I like some of the different features and how it organizes things and gives you data and stuff like that. Thank you for creating the system. I think it's like I've like from the time I first started using it to now, like I really enjoyed like having that like option, and as a way of just kind of like of trying to have a discussion with like 30 people. Like